takes all of this energy and excitement and enthusiasm to take that first leap. But once you do, it gets easier from there.
Welcome, passive investors, to another episode of Passive Income Adventures, where we talk about how to get more passive income so that you can do what you want, retire early or not. It's totally up to you. And today we have Randy Smith with us. He is the host of the podcast, The Gentle Art of Crushing It. And I love that title because for me, when I hear crushing it, I automatically just turn off. And because I'm trying to get passive income so I can retire, and it's not about crushing it. So I like the way that you're playing on that, on how to get more passive income. And you're also the founder of your own private equity group. Randy, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about just your current background and then your recent history, and then a little bit about how you got where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. Emma, thank you so much, first of all, for having me on the show. I have been a big fan of yours and have just been seeing you everywhere lately. So it's really exciting to be on your show with you. So yeah, as you mentioned, my name's Randy Smith. I'm the founder of Impact Equity. It's a private equity company that was formed just in July of this year, so 7 months ago, with the goal of educating and inspiring the passive investor on their journey from only investing in the stock market and trying to help them decrease their dependence on their W-2 income. So I am at a very high level. I was a high-income W-2 guy for many years. I found active real estate investing very quickly. Within a few years, shifted over to passive investing, and now starting to come back into the active space a little bit in conjunction with the passive income. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, we're definitely in the same boat with what we're working on because we're both active investors, but our goal is to get more passive income. And sometimes it just seems like it doesn't really go together. If you are actively helping others invest, raising capital, sponsoring deals, then really where's your passive income coming from? So can you talk to us a little bit about your background on how you ended up here and how that ties in with your passive income versus the staying engaged in a job, basically being self-employed or owning a business?
Yeah, it's interesting. Gosh, how far back do I go? So I have rich dad, poor dad type of background in that my mom and stepdad were small business owners. They owned a small restaurant in a very small town in northern, and they worked 60 hours a week and were confident that if they just hustled and worked and provided great value, that they were going to be taken care of. My dad, on the other hand, he worked for LA County Sheriff's Department, so Los Angeles County. And throughout his career, he didn't make a ton of money in his career, but he was very wise with his dollars and actually bought apartment complexes in LA County down during the 60s and 70s and 80s, I believe is what it was. So I got to see these two extremes of hustle and work your butt off in small business versus have a W-2 and be very smart with your money and invest it in real estate, cash flowing assets. And the differences between the lifestyle were dramatic. So that was in the back of my mind. My whole life was that if I go out there and I get a W-2 and I work hard and partner that with being very smart and frugal and investing in cash flowing assets, then ultimately that'll lead to the type of lifestyle that I want to lead. So that's a short summary of that, I think.
That is a powerful story, a powerful contrast. I know I've told this story before, but I had a similar experience when I was asking my mom. I was probably like 10 or 11. And my dad was a trailblazer, but always a W-2 guy. He was a software developer back in the 1970s to teach math. And he switched over to basically teaching software development for Motorola and Boeing. And so we always thought, oh, tech industry, that's the way to go. Big companies, Boeing. But I remember being about 10 or so and asking my mom about her parents and how my grandparents basically made money because she told me that they were retired. I was like, goodness, how could you retire from a job? How do you make money? And she said, oh, he has his Air Force pension and he was really smart with the stock market. So he made $1 million and he just lives off of the dividends. And as a 10-year-old, that was like, wait, you could put money away, invest it in something, and then live on passive income. And so comparing that to my dad, who is some kind of a rock star tech guy developer, and then all of a sudden being like, wait a second, like he works a lot of hours, he travels a lot, he commutes a lot, but I have these retired grandparents who just live off of their dividends. And so those kinds of powerful experiences when you're young, I didn't even realize how powerful of an experience that was for me until years later when people were asking me like, how did you get these ideas about passive income? And I remembered this early experience. So it's really unique that you have both of those to put together and really tell you the story. So once you realize that, like once I realized that, it took me years to actually get around to doing something about it because I didn't know
Yeah.
how. It's like you read Rich Dad Poor Dad
Yeah.
and you get all done, you're like, yeah, let's go. And then you don't know what to do. So for me, that experience about my grandparents was my Rich Dad Poor Dad moment. And then I had no idea what to do and took me years. So how did you get from that realization as a kid to where you are currently as an investor?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question. And you alluded to it as well, where you said, like, those messages and those belief systems are actually born and they exist in you, and you might not even know that they're there. So I still had within me that you go off to basically, you go off to college to get out of this little town because I had to go get an education to get out of the small town USA. Go get a good corporate job was my path. And I did that, I would say, fairly well. I rose up the stack ranks. I got a lot of awards. I made some good money in the last handful of years that I was in my career. But in the back of my mind, I never wanted to be that guy that was going to go be the vice president of sales or the president of this or leading this division or something like that. Because quite frankly, I didn't want to work the 90 hours a week that I saw those leaders working. So I had this struggle where I'm rising the corporate ladder, and yet I have this idea in the back of my mind, if I can just start to invest in real estate, then that is what's going to give me the financial independence and time
Mhm.
independence that I'm really striving for. So I had kind of these cycles in my career where I would move into a new role. When I was in a new role, it would take inevitably a year to get very well versed at it, rise to the ranks in that specific role, and really get my expertise. And then I would start getting bored. And that's when I would spend time looking at. And what would happen is two or three different times as I was looking at real estate, I would end up moving into a new role and have to start that cycle all over again. Or I would get a promotion and have to start that whole cycle again. And then it would be another year or 2 year window where I put real estate to the side because I've got this great opportunity in front of me that I've got to take advantage of. But I was in sales for 20, 25 years in sales leadership. So I spent a lot of time listening to podcasts. I had a ton of windshield time driving from client to client. And that's when I hit Podcast University and books on Audible and listened to all the people that I'm sure you have as well until one point when I had made all the money I thought I needed to make in corporate America. And I was at that comfort zone again when I finally pulled the and jumped in with real estate to take that first scary risk of trying this thing that has been this unicorn I've been chasing for years and years.
I love that how relatable that is because so many of us didn't know exactly what to do. We went to college, we got a job, we did what we were supposed to do, even though a lot of us knew in the back of our head that there was a different way to do it because you and I were probably on that similar level of kind of upper middle class, but not quite. We had some
Mm-hmm.
rich friends, but we were trying to figure out how did they do it. And in my experience, usually it was they had some sort of a very high paying job. They were the director of a high government agency or physician or something like that. But I didn't know a lot of investors when I was a kid. And then when we started being exposed to those more like in our 20s and 30s and our young married couple, some of our neighbors had storage units and some of them bought old apartments and converted them to condos. Like, we met people doing this, but we never really could figure out the how of it. So it's very
Right.
relatable now that you have the podcast with the windshield time that you're just listening to this stuff. And that's what everybody, especially who's listening to this podcast right now, that's what we're all doing. Talk about how from that very relatable beginning that many of us were just doing because we were trying to just do something while we were figuring something else out. How did you then make the shift from that to say your first deal? And then, if I don't know if it was your first deal that did it, but the deal that really helped you turn the corner. Can you tell us about those two deals? Maybe it was the same one, maybe not, but
Yeah. Yeah. I think ultimately the first deal that you hear about the magic or the law, the first deal, whatever that is, it's like the energy that it takes for a rocket to take off. It takes all of this energy and excitement and enthusiasm to take that first leap. But once you do, it gets easier from there. And that was my experience. I sat on the sidelines for a lot of years and I was listening to so many of these podcasts going, these people are just like me. In fact, I think I can do it better than what they're doing.
yep.
And I'm just so afraid, and I have these limiting beliefs that are keeping me from taking the first steps. My wife and I go through this process where we sit down and we do this annual review: what went well, what didn't go well, what goals did we achieve, what didn't we achieve. And I was yet looking at another list of a year that passed by that I didn't pull the trigger, and set the goals for the new year that this is going to be the year that I'm going to do it, and jump back in the car behind the windshield and heard a podcast and decided to pull the trigger because the guy that I was listening to on this podcast had a ton of energy, a ton of enthusiasm. He was very charismatic. And I went home and I said, honey, we're doing it. And she said, "Who is it?" I'm like, "I don't know. It's some guy I heard on a podcast." And we go back and forth a little bit. And finally, we're doing it. Okay, we'll put 25 grand up and buy a turnkey rental in Kansas City. We're in Phoenix, by the way. So we jumped in and bought that deal. And I will say, looking back, it probably was not the best investment or the smartest move for me to make. But had I not made that first one, I wouldn't have made the second one. I wouldn't have made the third or the fifth or the seventh. And I certainly would have never found like freedom from my W-2 and passive income had I not bought that first investment opportunity.
It's like standing at the plate in baseball when you're a kid and the first time you get up there and you don't really know if you can hit that ball. But you got out of the dugout, you picked up the bat, you went and you stood there and let that pitcher throw a ball at you. Even
Yeah,
if you strike out, even if you hit a couple of fouls, you're just hoping for a base hit. All you want to do is just get on base. And I think a lot of times, especially when you're listening to podcasts, you're listening to people who are so much higher than we are and doing so much more with real estate than we are, it's really easy to feel like every deal has to be a home run because that's the way this person does it. No, we all started out with our knees clacking together as we're just standing there holding the bat trying to get on base. And there's a lot of bravery that it takes just to stand there and let a pitcher throw balls at you. Even if you strike out, even if you foul out, even if you get a walk, that's what we all want. We all want to walk to first base. If you
absolutely.
can figure out how to walk to first base, then you're on base. And so I appreciate that you can look back on that and say, hey, maybe this wasn't the best deal as far as rate of return, and maybe there were some other issues with it. Maybe the house was old. I've heard a lot of turnkey horror stories, but you think it's turnkey and it's really not. Like, you own that home. It's your responsibility. Maybe the property manager's no good. Maybe the guy who sold it to you was a little bit of a charlatan, shall we say.
Uh-huh.
All sorts of things. Maybe it was a great deal. Maybe it was just a base hit, just an easy deal. Maybe just didn't have great returns. But the fact that you did it is what then launched you on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. You have to start somewhere. Just figure out, get a walk to first base. Nobody cares. Your first deal is not something that you're going to jump on a podcast and tell everybody about until maybe 10 years later or 5 years later when you have some
Right.
really great deals under your belt at that point. Just get the reps in. Time with the ball is what we call it, where you're trying to help your kid play baseball and you're frustrated because he can't get the hang of it. And you're trying to tell him, okay, eye on the ball and swing the bat this way. And at a certain point, you realize there's no amount of advice I can give this kid to help him be a better baseball player. He just needs time with a pitcher throwing balls at him or in the batting cage. And that's exactly what you did. So tell me about how you transitioned from that so deal of taking action to the one that really was like, this put me on, and it gave you new energy and new life and new commitment. And you realize, like, hey, this is the direction I need to be moving.
Boy, God, I wish I could look at any one of these investments and think, man, that was a slam dunk and it was super easy and went perfectly well.
I'm the mindset. Like, what was the one that really was like, oh, wow, that opened your eyes? Maybe it wasn't even that great of a deal, but it was the one that really helped you figure out what direction you're moving. Or were you more of an iterative process, like a software developer?
Definitely. So I failed forward. I will say that. I had my turnkeys that had all kinds of different challenges. But what I learned through that process is I want to be more involved in the renovation process and more involved in the quality of the asset that I end up.
Mm-hmm.
So we shifted over to the Burr model. We ended up taking what we had learned on the other one and bring that into the Burr strategy. And we started bringing in like some strategies I learned from Neil Bawa with his market selection process. And anyway, so we end up doing the Burr strategy on a handful of properties. And that's where I really started to see the power of leveraging different strategies to drive equity and to create wealth that we can then move forward on our path into other deals. So we had our first property in Atlanta we bought for 50 grand and put 50 grand into it and sold it for well over 200 just a couple of years later.
Wow.
So yes, there was a ton of work that was involved with that, but looking at it now, that's the easiest 100 grand I ever made in my life,
Yeah.
real honestly. But again, we landed on Burr and we thought this was going to be the strategy that we were going to take out to 100 and very quickly learned that was probably not a strategy that I wanted to spend the next 15 years doing. That's why we started looking at multifamily, as so many people do in the single family space. And then the question was, do we want to be active in multifamily or do we want to be passive in multifamily? At first, I started looking at passive investing as a way to peek behind the curtain and see if I wanted to get into a GP position.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out that those general partners work a lot of hours and it looks a lot like those people working 90 hours a week that I've been trying to avoid that role my whole career. So decided that was not a path that I wanted to pursue. And we just jumped into passive investing and fell in love with it and got very aggressive with our goals and strategy in that space.
I think your realization of how much time it takes to be an active investor. You are creating a company, you're basically becoming a business owner, an entrepreneur. And a lot of times people mix up the entrepreneur and the investor as the same thing. It's two very different personality types, two very different profiles. And so you're good to have honed in on that very quickly that you want to be an investor, you want to be an involved investor. You don't want to be a
Mm-hmm.
sleepy landlord. You want to be a hands-on investor, but you don't want to be an entrepreneurial business owner. And
Yeah.
I'm coming from the same place. And what made me realize that was about a year into starting this, I knew that it would be a layoff protection because my husband had just been laid off in, I believe that was 2017. And I just didn't really feel like we were prepared. And I was a little embarrassed that the amount of money I was making at my photography business couldn't really keep the ship afloat. And so
Mm-hmm.
when we relocated and basically redesigned our lives after he got a new job, I was looking at, well, what can I do with my time? Because he was working full time. And I was cleaning the house a lot and watching YouTube. And I thought, okay, I want to start a business. And so I decided to start a real estate business because I felt like this is the highest income earning potential I had because I don't have a medical degree or anything like that, right? I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
go after what I personally can make the most money doing. And it was so much more than being a business consultant or a marketing person or graphic designer or my other actual skill sets. But I said, I'm going to go after this. I'll be a high income earner. But it was less than a year into it before I realized this is not just a high income earning type of job or business. This can retire us. This can turn us into retired passive investors. And that's when I really got excited about it. So it wasn't a particular deal for me. It was a moment that I don't have to work because my husband doesn't have to work. When he's working, I'm going to be doing something,
Mm-hmm.
right? But when I realized he didn't have to work anymore, I was like, I don't want to work. And it was from that point on, the last 4 years have been a winding down period where we're trying to make as much money to invest as possible so that we can wind down and have a sabbatical. We don't really want to retire. I just call it we want to have
Mm-hmm.
a sabbatical.
Yeah.
So tell me about that process for you. I know you recently went through a layoff. You've probably been had some in previous years. So tell me
Yeah.
about that process from being employed and thinking this is the way to go to basically getting that layoff let down and realizing, okay, I need some other income to supplement or at least subsidize my W-2 income so that if this happens again, we're not in panic mode.
Yeah, no, good question. I'm in a unique situation where I was laid off. I was laid off from a job 10 plus years ago. And at the time, I got a short severance and the clock was ticking. I remember watching the severance clock as it would go, and like your options start to decrease pretty dramatically the closer you get to the end of that. And I remember at one point, like I had a job offer from a company that was about, I think it was about a third of the money that I was making. And I actually accepted the job because I was within a month of being
Yep.
at the end of my severance. And it's okay, maybe this is my path. I don't know. I'm going to go down this path. And the day before I was supposed to go into that job, I called the guy up and I actually backed out of it because I said, I can't do it. If I walk into that office that day and I accept making a third of what I was making before, like, how do you go from there to making the leap up to the next? Anyways, as luck would have it, I ended up getting like the job of my lifetime. It was an amazing 10-year career with a Fortune 100 company, and I did extremely well. But I would see in this organization that every 2 or 3 years we would go through this layoff cycle, and there was really no rhyme or reason to it, quite frankly. Like top performers would get laid off. People who had been laid off 4 or 5 other times with the same company would get laid off again, and they'd go sit on the sidelines for a while and then come back for another job. And at the end of the day, like if you are a W-2 employee, you don't have any control and you can think you're as stable as you want. But at the end of the day, you're a name on an Excel sheet. And if the investors or your stockholders need to hit a return and your position is not driving that return, then that position is going to be dissolved, is what I learned. So I started seeing that happen every 2 to 3 years in this company. And I started thinking that, yes, I need to decrease my dependence on my W-2. And fortunately, fast forward 10 years, I had done enough in the real estate space. We had bought a bunch of these properties. We were actually, the month I was getting laid off, or that I did get laid off, I was actually selling all of these single family homes. And I ended up making just as much money in the year that I got laid off because of the money that I made from those real estate deals.
Nice.
And I had shifted all of that capital over into passive investments. So I started getting this slurry of monthly deposits hitting my bank account from all of the passive investments that I had. Overnight, I go from a wealth generator with a great W 2, and I'm doing really well creating wealth with real estate, over to now I'm a cash flow investor and I need cash flow on a monthly basis, but I have that, which gives me the options to pick and choose. Do I go back to work? Do I not go back? I made the decision not to go back to work. And because of what I've earned and what I've learned in the real estate space, I don't think I'll have to go back to the W 2 ever again. And that's really a fairly short window being involved in the real estate space, which is just like you said at the beginning of the call, like maybe folks don't want to get enough passive income that they can leave their job. But when work becomes optional, what a powerful feeling that is to get that monkey off your back, that you go into work because you want to go into work, not because if you don't, you're going to starve.
We definitely have experienced that this past year with my husband. He was just recently laid off. We are still watching that severance clock tick, and we've had
Yeah.
to make the decision, what are we going to do? Is he going to go back to work? And if you're applying for unemployment, you need to be looking for a job. And so that's basically the route that we took. So as soon as severance runs out, we'll be back on the job market. But he can be much more intentional about it, much more picky. I don't want to use the word picky, but just really finding a great fit because he's not on some crazy time clock. And we actually planned in a sabbatical where he's not planning on doing a job search during that time. And our hope is that in a couple of months, we'll have ourselves sorted out where he can just say, I don't need unemployment. I don't need a job. We can just walk away. We'll see. We have about 6 months of a window to decide that. But I know
Yeah.
that the last year when he realized he didn't have to work anymore, suddenly he didn't want to work anymore. It became
Right.
the same thing where he would say, someday when I can go to work because I really believe in the product and I really believe in the company and I really believe in what we're doing, it'll feel different when I walk in there versus when I have to be there and make money. As soon as he knew he didn't need to be there to make money, the denial went away. I'll give you a brief example. When my dad was in hospice and he was moving back and forth between the hospital and the nursing home, hospital, nursing home. And my husband worked for a company that aggregated patient data records. And the state of Washington, where I grew up, where my dad was living at the time, was required to use the software in all of their hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, and emergency rooms. It is a great piece of software because as he's getting shuttled from the hospital back to the nursing home, my sister, who's a nurse, would be taking notes and she'd be catching up the new nurse or the assistant on, okay, they gave him this and this was what they diagnosed. And he'd have his iPad and he'd say, oh, ma'am, I've got it all right here. Don't worry about it. And I remember poking my husband and being like, hey, tell him you're welcome because these guys all knew what was going on and he felt a huge amount of pride working on that product that he saw in action helping my dad right there. That was in 2019. My dad passed away right before COVID. And during 2020, we thought life was great. He's working from home 100%. Everything was great. But about 2021 was when he started to be like, I don't have to do this anymore. It doesn't matter how great our product is and how gratifying it was to see it in action. I'm just not feeling this anymore. And he wasn't quiet quitting on purpose, but he was quiet quitting from his mindset. And the deterioration of his experience in the job place that last year that he was there was pretty stark. And eventually, when he got laid off, I don't think that it was a tough decision for them to choose who in that department had to go. Let's choose the quiet quitter because he realized I don't have to be here anymore. And he couldn't talk himself into it anymore. It was no longer, I don't have to be here, so I'll come in and I'll work my best. No, I'd rather just do something else. I'm tired of learning about these high level technical things that I'm never going to remember or use again. So I don't know if you had that same experience when you finally walked away from your most recent position. Tell me the story of that, how your mindset changed and how your ability to basically go from I don't need a W 2 anymore and why you still choose not to have one, even though you could.
Yeah, that's interesting. So and I think you mentioned a key piece is mindset. I joined a mindset community in January of last year, which would have been almost 6 months prior to the last.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually went really deep with that community and got one-on-one coaching, actually joined this group called Inner Circle, which is the elite membership of this mastermind community. And I started setting bigger goals, like impossible goals that quite frankly made the people at my company very uncomfortable, I believe. Because I had, let's just say as an example, I had a goal that was 100. And I came in and they asked what my goal was for the year. And I said, my goal is 1,000 this year, just in relative terms. And they all looked at me like I was nuts.
Yeah.
But if my thought was, if I'm going to be here, I'm going to blow it out of the park and I'm going to make so much money that I can pile into these passive income deals that ultimately will allow me to leave. So I became that same guy, the quiet. I wasn't the quiet quitter, but I was the quiet, I don't really care guy. I'm going to show up and work really hard and I'm going to be very good at this, but I'm not going to come in like sniveling, oh my gosh, please don't lay me off. Please don't quit me. Yeah, I had different options at that point. And it was built partly because I had all these dollars that were coming in on the sideline. I like how you talked about the fact that we tell ourselves these stories that we have to show up, we have to love our job, we have to be the guy shouting from the mountaintop about how wonderful of an opportunity we have at this W-2, when deep down inside we probably, or at least maybe, don't believe that anyways. For me, it was a big mindset shift and really starting to take a look at what is it exactly that I want to do? What value do I want to bring to this world? And what are what are some of the challenges that people face that I can help, and ultimately bring more value to the community that I decide to put myself in. And financial independence was one of those, and passive income was one of the tools and strategies that I leveraged to do that. The mindset shift is really what got me there.
I wanted to wait until I had 100% replaced my husband's income before we left the job. And I technically did because what I pull in every year is more than what he does, but then I reinvest 90% of it. So I was wanting to
Right.
pull in what he was making as my keep, my 10% that I kept. And we didn't quite make it because he had decided that he was going to leave the position in January anyway. And so it really made no difference except he had 2 months of severance to get started on his next phase of life. But I feel like we decided to quit and then decided for us with the layoff a little earlier than I was feeling quite ready. So I'm feeling a lot of uncertainty right now, and I'm not exactly sure how we're going to do this. So I feel like if you're familiar with financial independence, retire early, have lean fire and fat fire. So the acronym financial independence, retire early stands for fire.
Yep.
And when you first leave your job, you're in lean fire, meaning I can barely make it, but I don't have to work anymore. And that suddenly
Yep.
opens your time up to go and build something. So you're kind of still working for yourself at that point. So you can get to fat fire where you really are not just job optional. At that point, you're income optional almost because you have so much of the
Yep.
past. Tell me your thoughts on when you first decided to leave, like how close was your boat to the shore when you made the leap? Because I felt like we were a little far away and then my fingers at the edge of the boat and I'm trying to climb into it at this point.
Yep.
So tell me about what that looked like for you.
Yeah, so for us, I had about a 3-year plan to leave my W-2, and I was about a year into it by the time we did that. So I saw the strategy that I was going to leverage to get there. Now, and I'm not sure using the terminology that you use, but what I can share is my passive income covers the majority of my mandatory expenses for the house. It doesn't cover our lifestyle, so we're probably not going to go to Europe this year. We're still going to give, but we're not going to give outrageously this year. So it will be a little bit tight for us. What it did is as you said, it gave me the ability to go all in and bet on myself and jump in and chase the dream and the passion, the desire that I was really missing in my W-2 job. The golden handcuffs are a real thing. When you're making very good money, it's hard to step away from that job to go jump in and do something else from an entrepreneurial standpoint, because you're not going to make money probably the first 6 months that you jump into an entrepreneurial role. For me, the golden handcuffs were keeping me there. And I look at the layoff as really a gift that allowed me the opportunity to jump in and go deeper. It's an interesting process. I've talked with a lot of folks that have been through something similar as well. And yeah, boy, it's a good question. I don't know this. I don't know the short answer, but odds are I probably would not have taken the jump when I did. But this app helped me accelerate my process ultimately.
I respect this honest conversation about what it looks like when you first decide to leave because we
Yeah.
all have in our field we know a lot of people who are doing this full time and they'll make the I quit announcements on social media and you think, "Oh wow, they're living on their passive income now." They're not. They're now self-employed entrepreneurs or business owners and for me, I'm in that period where I'm frustrated that only maybe 50 to 80% of our income is coming from passive income because I want it to be 100%. I want a sabbatical so bad. So basically what we did was the 4-hour work week thing where if you've ever read that book at the beginning, he says, just create a dream. We don't care how crazy it is. And then I want you to map it out like you're actually going to do it. How much time is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? And what are the logistics? And the example he gives in the book is biking around Switzerland. And it's going to take you 6 weeks to actually do it. It's going to cost you $5,500 of airfare, food, hotels, accommodations, whatever. And then you're going to spend another couple of months preparing, getting rid of your possessions, letting go of your apartment lease, whatever it looks like, right? And he said, this is your life dream. and you're not going to do it for 6 weeks and $5,500. And that hit me like a ton of rocks. He was never saying, just quit, just walk away, wait until you're completely financially free. He's talking about the dream before the dream. And I thought, I can do that. I can go on some sort of a sabbatical just by saving up some money. And I know a lot of people in the RV, full time RV community, that's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Save up 2 years worth of income. They'll sell everything. They'll go RV for 2 years. They know this isn't permanent. Then they know they have to come back, get a house, get a W 2 again. And so I thought, how can I stretch, how can I shorten the timeline of when things are tight to when things are
Mm-hmm.
fat and build in some sort of a sabbatical there? So that's the purpose that we're on right now. It's a very real and raw conversation. Like the second that you quit doesn't mean that you just hit 100% passive income. It means that you make that now you can leverage your extra time to go out and figure it out more as an entrepreneur until you're 100% investor. Like I said, we're maybe 50 to 80% investors, and the other 30 to 50% is entrepreneurs, where we're selling products or we are like renting out our basement,
Right.
things like that. So, where are you at in that journey? Let's catch up to
Yep.
where you're at in that journey and how you're now helping other people who are a little bit behind where you are.
Yeah, yeah. So good. So yeah, as I mentioned, we cover our core expenses with our passive income at this point. We are invested very heavily as an LP in a number of different deals, 18 to be exact, across 8 different operators. So we have diversification across deals, across operators, across asset classes, geographies. We've got dollars in little buckets planted all over the place. And the goal ultimately is when you plant those little buckets, that they come back with friends in a few years. As those buckets start to come back with friends, then that will cover the lifestyle for us on the back end of it. From an entrepreneur standpoint, both my wife and I are entrepreneurs. My wife has 2 businesses, and I've recently started connecting investors with operators. So I help educate and inspire the newer passive investor. And we make a few dollars doing that on the front end. But again, we're planting more buckets in the backyard that will come back with friends due to those efforts as well. We can see the end of the tunnel at this point, and it's an exciting place to be because that W-2 looming out there is not something we have to chase anymore. We can adjust lifestyle slightly and be okay from this point on, all due to passive investing in real estate.
And we prepared for it by downsizing our house, and we had an adjustable mortgage on the house that we moved out of, and it has gone up like $1,000 a month since the interest rates have gone up. We're renting it out right now, so it covers that. But the scary thing is about it is if we had stayed there, we would be paying now $1,000 a month more on
Mm-hmm.
that home. But instead, we downsized to a fixed mortgage, rented that one out. It's become a great source of income to us, even though eating into the profit with the higher arm. But I feel like making sure we didn't buy a new car, that we just paid for the old cars and just kept them running, that we're in this smaller house because not only is the house smaller and more affordable, but we don't have all the yard work and we can really spend time working on our passive income adventures rather than focusing on weeding the backyard or having to hire someone to come and take care of that house. And so, were there any things that you did? Because you said you had a 3 year plan. I'd love to hear about your preparations during that 3 year plan, like for us downsizing a house, not having a yard, and those kinds of
Yeah.
things. What were your preparations in your 3 year plan? You got cut off a little early like we did, but what did it look like?
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you asked that question because my 3-year plan really started after another plan that my wife and I went. My wife and I have been married for about 8 years now. And when we got married, both of us came into the marriage with a little bit of debt. So we actually leveraged Dave Ramsey's baby steps, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. And a lot of people have a lot of very strong opinions about the baby steps. Yeah. And there's even bigger opinions about baby steps 6 and 7. So
Yes.
we don't have to get into all of those details, but I will say I'm a huge advocate of Dave Ramsey. And so far as that, I think if you can get your financial house in, which means pay off all the stupid debt, get rid of credit card bills, make sure you don't owe the IRS a ton of money, don't chase after the Joneses with the $100,000 cars and the $1 million houses that they can't afford. Yeah, and get to a position where you can live comfortably and accomplish all the goals that you want to accomplish within some dollar amount. Because ultimately, if you're truly going to take the step away from the W, you have to know how much you need to live on. And my suggestion is not to come up with a number that you're going to starve and ultimately you're going to go grab the credit card and spend a couple $1,000s on something. Like, you need to have a workable budget, which includes I need to spend X amount on clothes every year. My wife and I do like to go out, so let's include that. As a family, we want to give X percentage, so include that in your budget. And we like to travel. Whatever that
Mhm.
number is to cover all your basics and the life you want to live, figure out what that is. And once you have that, then you can start orchestrating or curating your passive income plan that will meet those needs. So we did the baby steps to do that. We got to a comfort level where I was in a sales position where I was getting rather large bonus checks. And we got to a point where we were putting 75% of our bonus checks into passive investment. We
Smart.
also then were taking 25% of those bonuses and we were blowing them on anything we wanted to. We traveled the world. We went to Italy. We went to Spain. We've been to Hawaii a bunch of different times. I'm a points junkie because I work for a credit card company, so I get all
Mhm.
geeked out about points. So we did all of those things, and we got to live a good life. But if you're budgeting to a point where it's like doing the diet where you're not going to eat sweets and then you end up with cookies and ice cream on your plate, you do the same thing from a budget standpoint. So I'm a firm believer, set up the budget that is the life you actually want to live and give, and plan and curate around that number. So that's what we did to get right.
Live like no one else, so later you can live like no one else.
I heard that somewhere before. Yes. Yeah.
I don't like talking about scarcity and restriction or self denial because I feel like the whole point of wanting passive income is so you don't have to do those things. But I do think it's important to realize that there's a price to pay. Passive income as a term, I've talked about this on this podcast before, it's a myth. I just think that it's a name and it doesn't really reflect what's going on. So I think sometimes it's difficult for people to hear like you really have to prepare your lifestyle in
Mhm.
order to live on your passive income. Your passive income will continue to grow. What you're trying to do is free up your time so you can grow it. There's a stage process to this. There's a spectrum. And you have
Yep.
to ask yourself, when are you willing to get off of the 9 to 5 treadmill? And then at what point are you going to say, I'm living off 90, 200% of passive income? And what am I doing in between? And
Mhm.
backing into that, it's just like with the 4 hour work week where he was like, just plan out the Switzerland trip, $5,500. I can do that. We did the very similar where we just decided my husband made this much a month, but we are only living on this much a month. So if we could just make that much a month, then
Mhm.
we could pay everything. It'd be tight, but we knew that bigger things were coming as things we were invested in started coming back and maturing. And we had a number, like a fire number of cash we wanted invested and how much of percentage of that cash we were going to live off of when it came back in distributions, how much we were going to put back out. And that is what
Mhm.
equaled that basic amount that we needed
Yeah.
to just be able to pay all of our bills and occasionally like eat at a restaurant, but not have nice stuff.
Yeah.
And that's where we are. And it's a sacrifice. And a lot of
Yeah.
people don't want to hear that. But I don't know anybody who's done this who hasn't gone through that iterative process of figuring out how much do I need? How much do I want? How do I back into that? And then what can I sacrifice in the meantime? It's a Dave Ramsey kind of a message.
And I think it's a good point. What can I sacrifice? And maybe more importantly, what do you want to sacrifice? Right. I'm a huge advocate of the who, not how strategy mentality. There are just certain things that I want to pay somebody to do it. I don't want to clean my house. I don't want to do my yard work. I don't want to deal with the pool. I want to pay somebody to do that. And I was meeting with my coach last week and he's like, are you willing to go back to your W 2 job so you can maintain those things? And I'm like, no, I'm not willing to do that, but I'm not willing to give up the dream that I'm going to cover all of those expenses as well with the money that I'm making with the business and the passive income. I think the who, not how strategy is important for you to look at your life and decide how you actually want to spend your time. And if it is 40 hours a week with W 2, go ahead and do that. If it's 90 hours a week as an entrepreneur, do that. Or if it's somewhere between 4 hour work week and that, then choose that. But we all have decisions and choices we make every single day. And fortunately, we get to make those choices and deal with the consequences, good and bad.
It takes a lot of planning. And for me, I like the big rock, small rock. I think Ramit Sethi talks about this. He said, when you're looking at not spending $8.50 on a Starbucks latte, that is not going to make you rich. Your problem is your house payment. Your problem is your car payment. Your problem is how much
Right.
you spend eating out. Take care of the big rocks first. And so we looked at our big rocks first, said, okay, spending most on our housing. How can we reduce that? And then there were some things that we were spending money on that were smaller rocks, maybe medium sized rocks. And I'm like, I don't actually need that thing
Mhm.
because when you're getting all the things without thinking about it or about planning about it, you end up with some stuff that's but that you realize I don't actually want to postpone my dreams so I can have those things. So we just started canceling subscription services. We started canceling all sorts of stuff. And we started saying, hey, how often do you actually want to drive up to visit? Because it's
Mhm.
like you just do these things to do them. But when you start taking care of the big rocks first, you realize what rocks in there can be smaller, as far as money outlay, and what rocks in there like really don't care that much about. So I got like a uniform wardrobe where I basically just went out and I bought a bunch of things in very similar colors. And one person has commented on it. You wear charcoal gray all the time. Like, yeah, because it matches everything. And so I have only a very few things left over from my previous wardrobe that have any color in them. And it's super easy. French classic pieces, high quality. They're going to last me forever. Nobody cares. And so I don't have to
Right.
spend money on clothes because I went out and I got myself a uniform. It's the whole minimalist mindset.
Yeah.
And big rocks. There are some big rocks that I love. I am not giving that up. Like you said, the pool guy, whatever. Maybe you'll do it yourself for a while. Keep what you love. Keep
Yeah.
what really motivates you. Keep what really makes you happy. You can't have all the things, so pick the things very wisely. It's the same in the gym and a diet. If you love ice cream, build ice cream into your regimen. But that doesn't mean you have to have cookies and chips and whatever. If those things are lower value for you, you
Sure.
can't have all the things. So pick the couple that are really high value targets. And so I hear that's what you're saying. It's like you've got to really take a critical look at everything. We're not asking people to live like monks. We're just
Right.
asking ourselves and others who want to be inspired to go on the passive income journey to just be more intentional about what rocks you're keeping and what rocks you're shrinking and what rocks just don't really need to be in there. A lot of sand. Dump out the sand.
Love it. Love it.
So Randy, I would enjoy hearing about what you're working on now, and we want people to reach out to you after the show. So invite them and let them know how to get a hold of you.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about this earlier, but I also am a podcast host. I do a podcast called The Gentle Art of Crushing It, and I do it in partnership with 6 other hosts. So I do one day a week, and the other 6 guests actually share the other 2 days a week throughout the month. And my specific episodes are all tailored towards this type of stuff. So I'm helping to educate and inspire the new passive investor who's transitioning from traditional stock investing over to passive investments in real estate. So they can also connect with me. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and my website is impactequity.net. And if you are starting that journey to passive investing, I got a great giveaway that helps to identify the top 10 questions to ask a syndicator before investing with them. And you can find that on my website at impactequity.net.
Great title, because sometimes we can overcomplicate things. So
Yeah.
yes, please reach out to Randy after the show. We are doing this because we love to hear each other's stories and we want to hear your story. So please don't hesitate to book some time on our calendars and reach out, because we do want to visit with you, talk to you, figure out what your goals are, and if we can help you, great. Or if maybe you can help us with a resource. Who knows where this goes? But networking and the relationships are what drive this industry. And we really want to make a great network and a relationship with you. So please reach out. My last question for you, Randy, is what passive income adventure is on your bucket list that you're working on right now?
Passive income adventure. So are we talking about an adventure that my passive income will fund, or are we talking about a passive investment that I will try?
What is an adventure that you couldn't do unless you live this lifestyle? So it could be a business project, a real estate deal, it could be a vacation, but something that you would not be able to do unless you were living the passive income lifestyle.
Yeah, so one of my big bucket list items is to visit all of the continents. So my wife and I are going down that path. We went to Spain this last year. Actually, neat story. I got laid off, and then 4 months later, we still decided to go to Spain, even though we had no income coming in from the W-2 anymore. We made the decision to do that, and while we were in Spain, we took a ferry across the Straits of Gibraltar to Morocco, so I could step my foot on Africa and say I hit another continent. Now, we got to go back to Africa, but at least I can check that one off for now. And we'll go do our African safari maybe in the next year or two.
I don't think I've heard that as a bucket list one yet. I would love to have that on my bucket list. I think that's one of the things that you have to dream big to do that, and maybe I'm a little afraid to that that's what I'm aiming for.
Okay.
Got my
Interesting.
little, got my little whiteboard over here. Maybe I could write that one down. That'll be like the long-term bucket list. That's a good one. So
Yeah. Thank you.
all right. Thank you for joining us today. I really appreciated getting to know you better and being able to ask you questions, because you're a few years ahead of us with the whole layoff and passive income thing. So I really appreciated hearing your perspective and what you're working on. And I'm looking forward to just continuing to get to know you and network with you and see if we can get some deals done. So if you have
Absolutely.
anything that you think is great to invest in, please share it with our investing club. We basically pool our capital and we'll use that to go out and negotiate better deals. So if you have anything, feel free to share it. We'd love to have you. Everyone who's
Awesome.
listening, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Emma.